Commence primary ignition.
Hello there, it's Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're watching the Virtual Cantina Network. Ooh. Is there a blue milk around? Can I get something? I'm in a cantina after all. Goodbye there.
G'day and hello, Star Wars fans, and welcome to the Virtual Cantina Speakers Series, Season 3, Episode 4. Just before we meet our special guest for the day, I want to just announce that this episode in this series is sponsored by Hyperspace Props. Hyperspace Props, that's the link. If you wish to avail yourself of some amazing bits and pieces, Star Wars related, please go to www.hyperspaceprops.com. And as you can see right now, there's a 10% code that you can use for a discount off your purchase. There is the link, there is the code. Thank you very much, Hyperspace Props, for sponsoring this speaker series. Okay, so as I mentioned a minute ago, welcome to the amazing, very talented Paul Blake. How are you today, Paul? Nice to meet you.
Well, hello, Jonathan. And I would buy some Hypersense props, but unfortunately, my attic is chock full, and my wife tells me regularly to get rid of most of them. So I'm afraid not this week. But hey, everybody else, if they're there, get them.
Yes, absolutely. I think we're all Star Wars fans are in a similar position. It's finding enough space for the bits and pieces we buy. Okay, so Paul, this is a Star Wars show, and as you can imagine, Paul Blake is an English actor, best known for portraying Greedo, the bounty hunter in the 1977 movie Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. But before we get into Paul's involvement in the Star Wars universe, I just want to go through a bit of history about Paul, because he wasn't just in Star Wars. He had a great career in acting, both on television and stage. So over his extensive career, Paul has had roles in movies and television series such as Some of My Best Friends Are, Hennessy, Melissa, The Second Victory, Down to Earth, Wycliffe, and the series that I remember because I watch their grandparents every week, Crossroads. If you didn't know, for those of you that have never heard of Crossroads, it was a British television soap opera based in Birmingham, I believe, if my memory serves right. And it used to gross anywhere between 8 to 15 million viewers per episode. So it was very popular. Paul was part of that production.
Yeah,
so I remember Crossroads.
Extraordinary, eh? I mean, my greatest claim to fame, I think, being in Crossroads, and it's got a long history of alumni of British actors who've been in it. Most of them don't want to remember that they were in it for 1 minute, but I loved it because I was very, very young, and it had a reputation, kind of like Days of Our Lives and the rest of it. For the set on Crossroads is very rickety, so most of it shook, and if you leant against a table, the table would collapse or anything like that. And the acting was constantly as wooden as the tables themselves, because it was very limited turnaround. And I think we did about 4 shows a week. But you're absolutely right. No one owns up to having seen it, apart from when you meet them, and then they say, "Oh, my mum used to watch that," or "Yes, my great aunt used to watch it," and it was on at 6:30, and
That's right.
everyone when they came home from work used to watch it, and it had huge audiences compared to what even the great soaps of today, such as here in the UK anyway, like EastEnders or Coronation Street or any of the big soaps would get 8 or 9 million if they're lucky. We constantly got 13 or 14 million quid, mostly because people couldn't believe what they were seeing, basically. But no, it was entirely enjoyable, and I loved every minute of that.
Yeah. So some of our older British members that were based in UK will remember that. I remember it because I used to remember the signature tune to the series, and I was always sat down to do homework at the same time so that they could, the parents could watch it in peace and I could get on with something. But anyway, apart from film and television, Paul is obviously very well known for his roles in theatres, both in the UK and abroad. Paul played the title role in Macbeth at the Salisbury Playhouse, and Charles Swan in the Glasgow Citizens Theatre production of A Waste of Time.
I did. So, that's very highfalutin.
Yeah,
It can't be more chalk and cheese, can it? From Crossroads one week to playing Charles Swan in À la Recherche du Temps Perdu, which is Marcel Proust's 8-volume masterpiece, which was huge. I mean, it was a long long while ago at the Cits, but it was a phenomenal theatre to work in. And again, the alumni there, the actors who found themselves in that season and the season after were wonderful. Just sort of having people like Alan Rickman and Gary Oldman and Celia Imrie and Rupert Everett and Kieran Hines. I mean, you know, a huge list of the great and the good of theatre. So it was a fabulous place to work there. In fact, I met my wife just previous to working in Glasgow, and she played my daughter in that production.
Of all the things.
So she constantly reminds me of that, that I'm considerably older than she is.
How wonderful. And so obviously I won't get into my background, but I studied English literature, and we'll probably talk a little bit after the show about some of the productions I saw with the various acting alumni you mentioned. So we'll talk about that later.
Definitely.
But anyway, so that's actually a great segue into my first question, you know, getting to know Paul a lot better, and, you know, his career, and, you know, what he's done throughout, you know, from now, you know, from back in the day when he started right through to where he is today. So my first question is, and I like to ask this of a lot of people that I talk to. So if you cast your memory back to your younger days, so who or what was your early inspiration to start a career in acting? You know, how did that come about? Was it something like doing something through school or through college? I mean, how did you start in the acting profession?
It's always a great question. I like to ask other actors about how they got involved, because we often have a lot in common. But I'm a Brummie. Well, not a Brummie. I'm a black country boy. I was born in the West Midlands in the UK, and in the late 40s. I mean, 49 I was born, and round about the age of 10 or 11, like everybody else in the country, I kind of taught myself to play very poor guitar, and with friends at school who likewise were interested in music and singing, we used to practice and do cover versions, me and two friends, of loads of local and current sort of songs. And my friend's dad, who owned the house that we practiced in, was a club musician. And he used to play the clubs up and down the country. One evening he came in and he'd heard us doing a couple of a cappella things. And he said, "You're not too bad," he said. Remember, we were about 12 or 13 then. He said, "Would you want to do a few nights in some of the clubs that I go to? Because I think you'd go down quite well." So we said, yeah, no, that sounds absolutely fantastic. What do we do? So we turned up at these various working men's clubs and variety halls and ex-music halls. I mean, this is how old I am. And used to do a 10-minute spot on incredible bills with very famous people, all on the arse end of their careers, who ended up in the various theatres and music halls and places, and there we were at the bottom of the bill, and at the top of the bill were people like Max Wall and Elsie and Doris Waters and Max Bygraves and all those kind of great comics. And I mean, way back I'm talking. So it was a huge learning curve for us, but it was also wonderful, and it kind of got me, I suppose, into performing, and I kind of enjoyed it. And my dad in the Midlands was director of an amateur theatre company, and I used to go there and watch some of the plays, and occasionally as a kid would be in them. So I suppose I had, like most people in the UK in the 50s and 60s and 70s, this huge vast field of opportunity to perform. I mean, I suppose it's kind of similar today, although there are far fewer venues to perform live in. But that was kind of how I suppose I got started. Then when my friends and I had grown up a bit, because we did this for about 3 or 4 years. So by the time we were 16 or 17, and then we all went to university or college or whatever, and we sort of went our separate ways. And then I, like you, I did English at college, and was either going to teach or become I didn't know what I was going to do, but I wrote off the 2 jobs, and one was as a teacher in a school in Birmingham, and the other was as an assistant in a theatre and education company in Glasgow. And I tossed a coin, and it came down on Glasgow. So that's literally, but then it was serendipity, just like everyone else's story is that they need a little bit of serendipity in their lives. And but that's how I started, really, and that was it. And from that point of view, I was incredibly lucky, and always managed, I suppose, to find a job in theatre or film or TV or whatever from somewhere. So I was in a very lucky period where it was possible to do that. Not quite so easy for the kids today, especially here in Europe, where you kind of, if you're not an immediate star in TV or movies, you've really got to have another occupation, because it just won't keep you. You won't be able to certainly raise a family. So I think we were lucky at that period. But that's how I got started.
That's wonderful. Thank you for that. It's interesting. There's so many people that I've spoken to, just like yourself recently, that said it was as basic as seeing an ad in a newspaper or seeing an ad on a telegraph pole, something like that. And I just took the number and just called and said, they said, come down, come and talk to us. So
absolutely. There was the great magazine here was called The Stage and Television Today. And everyone looked through there for jobs, particularly in the light entertainment field. Ventriloquist assistant wanted, assistant to magician, that kind of thing, or the occasional ASM as an actor in a theatre somewhere or other. So yeah, everybody took the stage and just wrote off or rang to get a rejection at least twice a week. So that's you're absolutely right. Everyone has that story.
I've heard that as well. A lot of rejections, and then something finally sticks, and then it just goes from there. So my next question, I'm kind of changing gears a little bit, because this is a Star Wars show. We talk a little bit more about science fiction in a minute. So you talked about how you started your career and your inspiration, and how you kind of got into acting and on stage, etc. So slightly different question. So not related to Star Wars particularly, but what was your first introduction to science fiction? I remember having a tiny little black and white portable TV in my brother and my bedroom that was bought for our parents, and we were tuning until we found some kind of cheesy American kind of horror sci-fi thing. It just started from there. So what was your kind of introduction to the science fiction kind
very
of
similar to yours, Johnson? I mean, I loved like loads of people, I watched Star Trek right from the word go, again on probably a very small TV. So I loved the early American stuff, and I mean, I was right from the word go. Again, I was a huge Doctor Who fan, loved all that in the early days. But again, my dad had kind of liked sci-fi, and I remember him taking me to see It Came From Mars or something at the local flea pit, or it was something like yes, it's something like They Came From Mars, which was truly brilliant. It was just about a flying saucer landing in the deep south of the States, somewhere in the backyard of this farmer and his family, and then the aliens overtaking the bodies of the family that they'd and the kid kind of has to go and save the day to protect his mum. But it was both phenomenally brilliantly constructed and fascinating, and also incredibly terrifying for kids, especially for me. So yeah, so I was a sci-fi fan, but also kind of fancy. I mean, I read Lord of the Rings early on, and like everybody else did, and adored that, and other sort of fantasy stories. I mean, I'm a great fan of Jonathan Swift and Gulliver's Travels. I mean, I think that's one of my favorite books, and I'd recommend anyone to read that today, because it's vastness, and it encompasses a little bit of sci-fi, but a lot of fantasy and great storytelling and great structure. So yeah, I've diverged from the point a little bit, but that's kind of the early days of sci-fi for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think going through then and then building into, I was talking to a couple of people like yourself I've been talking to over the last several weeks, is, science fiction was kind of considered to be kind of cheesy. And then they really got serious about it, if you remember, in the early 70s with Close Encounters, and they kind of built into this kind of more tangible reality to sci-fi. But like you, I think it was like a Tuesday evening around 8 o'clock, BBC Two. It was always Star Trek. You could watch that after homework and before going to bed. So that was the kind of thing. Anyway, so kind of fast forwarding, right, from seeing sci-fi as we were back in the black and white TV days. Fast forward to 1976, right? This is the main part of what I wanted to talk to you about. So fast forward to 1976. We all remember that year, Paul, for being what was the hottest year on record in the UK, droughts everywhere. 1976 was, I remember it mainly for that, being just this endless summer and heat and lack of water everywhere and everything, chaos literally in a country that can't cope with that. But anyway, in 1976, when did you first hear about this production of a sci-fi movie at Elstree Studios that would become Star Wars? When did you first hear about that? What was the little spark that we didn't, maybe you didn't know it was going to be Star Wars, but what happened? How did that?
No, on the very first movie, none of us, and until much later, I suppose, knew the name. Indeed, it didn't have a name apart from Blue Harvest. That was the sort of the secret name that was bandied about by George and Lucasfilm, that it was going to become. But I got involved because of Anthony Daniels, who I'd been working with at the BBC on a children's show called Jack and Ori, which I'm sure you'll remember.
It.
And a lot of people remember. And we were in a Christmas special, which was great. And we had a good time. And a couple of weeks passed, and I had a phone call from him saying, "I'm doing a sci-fi film in the UK. They're shooting it here in the UK, and the director's desperate for some cheap actors." So I said, "I'm your man," immediately, and the director's looking for some more actors. Are you interested? So I my wife, who was also a dancer and an actress at that point, I was going, "Oh no! If it's sci-fi, it'll be Attack of the Killer Tomatoes," as indeed every other sci-fi film was in production, particularly in Europe at that time. So we had no idea, I suppose. But I said, yeah, because like every actor at the time, was desperate for the cash and the exposure. And about 2 or 3 weeks later, I found myself going very early in the morning to Elstree Studios, which was just on the outskirts of London, where we lived at the time, because every actor in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and today have to live in, it's like LA, have to live in London to work, because most of the agents are in London. It's a bit more diverse now, but in those days, it was more or less entirely London. So I found myself at Elstree very early in the morning, and walked out onto the set of the it was the Millennium Falcon, but built by flats. Now, by flats, I mean flat pieces of scenery with the Falcon painted on either side beautifully. I mean, standing 10 feet away, you wouldn't have known that it was a flat. It was just beautifully painted. But up the middle was a ramp, and you sort of went up the ramp to the entrance into the Falcon and then fell off the end, because that's the extent. That's the extent of what the Millennium Falcon was. But it was kind of cool. There's nobody else there, by the way. This was very early in the morning, apart from one guy in the far corner. And I went over to him and said, "I'm Paul. I'm here to see oh, you couldn't get me a cup of coffee, could you? I'm desperate. I haven't. And he went and got me a cup of coffee, and I was drinking this, and I said, do you know anything about the movie they're shooting? I said, I'm supposed to be seeing somebody called George Lucas. He said, I'm George Lucas. So,
No.
so I'd asked George Lucas to get me a coffee.
What a claim to
To
fame.
me and to him, I think, at the time. How dare I, But that's how I got. And then, lo and behold, about a couple of days later, I got an invite to do any part, I think it was. But so they sent me a script about 3 weeks later, and which I've still got to this day. And it was the now famous scene, but also the scenes with the original Jabba the Hutt, who was an actor, played by the Irish actor Declan Mulholland, who was wonderful.
That's right. That's right.
I read it all, and I said I couldn't make head nor tail of it. It was like reading the sort of telephone directory in gibberish. But
George's famous dialogue.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. But so the one thing I did recognize was that the now iconic scene, I suppose, was a traditional cowboy scene. If you forget the aliens, it was, the bar room, the bad guy goes in with his gun, he tries to get some money or whatever from the good guy, who was Harrison, Han Solo, and that's the way that I kind of understood it and thought, well, I think I can understand what's going on here. So yeah, sure. But that's how I found myself in the first film. Then went and shot it, and it was entirely fascinating, Elstree, in those days, because I mean, this is unheard of now, but I had a dressing room to myself, which was, for a bit player in a film like this, it was very unusual to have your own dressing room. And before that, I'd had a life mask done of the head. And in those days, you did it with plaster of Paris and stuck on your face, and then the back and the front come off, and they pour in a sort of latex solution, which makes the mask of your head, and then they give that to the modelers, and the modelers create whatever they want to on top of that head. It's very basic. It finished about here. So you could take it on and off, and that was sort of sitting there in my dressing room, as was the alien's costume. But the other really tangible thing about the movie was that the cantina scene was real. That was the only real set in those days, and that was quite stunning to look at, because it was lit beautifully, and the bar itself was all built as one piece, and the entrance at the back of it was real in one piece, and the booths were configured in such a way that they could be filmed fairly easily, and had all the various aliens in, most of which you don't see in the movie, because George just couldn't cram it all in, really. So I thought, this is quite fascinating. It was fascinating enough to go down and watch some of the other filming, even when I wasn't there doing my bit. But that's how I found myself in the original film.
That's wonderful. I want to come on to Steel Freeborn in a minute, if your experience there, but just to comment what you were saying, you're absolutely right. That's Luke's first step into another world. It's desert, it's Tatooine, it's desolation, loneliness. Into this, what on earth is this? So that's like another world. So next question is, so how were you selected to play Greedo? Were you just handed the part? Did you get a choice? How did that choice? How did that selection? How was that selection made? If you were,
it was just incredible luck. I was virtually just handed it. I really didn't. All I remember was when I sort of met George. He was naturally charming, and he was very shy in those days, and probably still is now. But he was very shy, and he said, well, that's it. Is there anything you want to ask me? And I said, being a very sort of eager young actor, I said, well, how do you want me to play this alien, George? And he paused for about a minute and looked at me and said, play it like they do in the movies. Which was the best bit of advice I think any director has ever given me. And I thought, yeah, I'm in a film, so I better play it like I'm in a film. So I think you mentioned Stuart earlier. I think it really was Stuart's genius with these creations, which was like Edith Evans. She used to say, once I get the shoes on, I know what the part's all about. I can, the part appears to me. And I think it was the same with Stuart's creations. They were so extraordinary that you were more or less given how to do it by these amazing creations.
So obviously, Stuart, I consider myself to be, he's an icon in the industry from back in the day, through to when he sadly passed away. All the work he did was amazing. I heard stories from people like Nick Maley that he would drive around London in costume and people would think he was somebody else, like Sultan of Brunei or whatever it was. But anyway, so back to Stuart. So what were your interactions with Stuart? With regards to Greedo's hair, the costume? Did you have a lot of conversation with Stuart around that, or the design?
I worked with Nick a lot, who was the AD at the time and also working for props and things. And Stuart was just really he was so rushed off his feet. I didn't have all that. I did with his wife. I had quite a lot to do with his wife because she was always on set doing alterations to fitments, and she was there to help with most of the masks going on and off, particularly in the iconic scene. Now the other scenes I could just sort of keep it on, but Stuart, I mean, he literally had so much. I do remember one conversation where I said, "How did you come up with Greedo?" And he said, "I have no idea." He said, "Because I'd had to do something like 30 other aliens in a week." He said, "So by the time I got to Greedo, I didn't know whether I was standing up or sitting down." He said, "And the night before the deadline I had on your image for George, this was for George to have a look at the following day, I saw an advert on British telly for bird's eye peas, and it was a bouncing green pea." And he said, that's where I got the idea for your head. No. So Greedo is essentially a bouncing green pea.
That's incredible. These ideas, just there's a spark, you see something, and that's how it happens. And by the way, if our members don't know, it was Kay Freeborn who was Stuart's wife, and a wonderful part of his team along with his sons. So let's talk a little bit more about the hair, the costume, etc. So tell us a little bit what it was like to wear Greedo's hair, the costume, and how difficult was it to act in the scenes that you had in the Cantina at Elstree?
Well, yeah, you mentioned that 76 was huge, a very hot summer, and indeed it was. So people tell me, I don't remember too much about that. I do know that Elstree didn't have any air conditioning, but they did open the stage doors quite often as they could when filming wasn't happening. There were lots of setups going on to let in a lot of air, so it did sort of get some air into there, and everybody kind of assumes that if you were an alien in any of the original Star Wars things, you sweated to death. I mean, certainly Pete Mayhew as Chewbacca, or Anthony as C-3PO, or Kenny as R2-D2. They were all in pretty horrendous situations from time to time because the costumes were so difficult to deal with, and for Pete particularly, incredibly hot, and he was sweating buckets all the time, as indeed was Kenny, I think. But for me, I was very lucky because, as I said earlier, the head just came off, so whenever we weren't filming I could take it off and breathe properly. And the costume was made out of a very lightweight parachute silk, so it was so light. I didn't suffer too much from excessive heat, particularly while on set, but a lot of the other people did. I mean, I think and then I learned something quite interesting about Greedo's kind of jerkin that he had, and I only found this out. This is typical of Star Wars, because you find out everything about it from everybody else over the last 40 years. We knew nothing at the time. It's only since then that fans and directors and other people have told us everything about it. And there was a guy who came up to me and said, "Do you know what happened to the jerkin, Paul?" I said, "No, I presume Lucasfilm have it, or it's Skywalker Ranch or somewhere." And he said, "No." He said, "What happened was, I think, was they tore it up and used part of it in Princess Leia's bikini as slave Leia."
No. You're joking.
Which is extraordinary if it's true.
Wow.
I'm not sure whether that is entirely true, but that's what I was told. So it'd be nice to think that Greedo lived on.
Wouldn't it? Wouldn't it?
With
Gosh.
Carrie as, and I never got the chance to ask her that. I should have. Mind, she probably wouldn't have known anyway. Either.
Well, listen, we have 74,000 members in our group, and if anybody knows, can confirm that as a fact, let us know. We'd love to know that.
Absolutely.
That's great, Paul. Thank you. So, so talk us. It wasn't too uncomfortable for you, take the head off, etc. So, can I talk more about the atmosphere of the cantina? One of my favorite questions is to ask about the atmosphere. Was it, a little chaotic? Was it, very well rehearsed? So, what was the atmosphere like among not just yourself, amongst the other actors that were in that particular scene that Luke steps into another world?
Well, the first movie was incredibly chaotic for everybody. I mean, everyone was on a sort of wing and a prayer, really. Particularly George, who was very conscious of bringing the movie in under budget, and because he borrowed the money and all the rest of it, and was incredibly heavily pressured by everyone during filming. And it's like all those times. I think when your back is against the wall and you haven't got the most amount of money that you can work with, you always come up with something rather wonderful, because out of necessity. And I think everybody kind of got into that after a while, particularly the crew. Again, when we all first started, we couldn't wait to leave. We thought, again, we were in Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. So for the first couple of weeks, the crew were incredibly dismissive of it all. But as it sort of grew further and further into its shooting, they realized that everyone involved was pretty well knew what they were doing. I mean, particularly Harrison and Mark and Carrie and of course George. George was the sort of solid center of all this, even though he was terribly reserved about it all. And he got one of the best British crews that were available at that point in history to shoot the film. So he got people who knew exactly how to film things in the way that he wanted, and in fact that's what happened during a lot of the cantina. The lighting cameraman would set up certain things and come in with ideas there and set it up, and then George would come in and look at it and say, yeah, but if we could just do that and then tweak a little bit, and then we shot it. It was remarkably as far as I can remember, because it's a long way back now, but it was remarkably well organized. It had to be, because the shoot was so short and so expensive, and things went wrong all the time. I mean, costumes fell to pieces, particularly stormtroopers. I mean, that's iconic now. I mean, it fell to bits all the time and had to be gaffered, as did a lot of the set. Again, reminiscences of Crossroads in there. And the central scene that I did in the little booth with Harrison and the famous scene nearly didn't happen, because in those days every movie had a Gelignite man who would be there to blow things up, and it was always over enthusiastic. And in those days, you always said to anyone that was in a scene that was dangerous, you always said, well, you do it first and then I'll have a go, and if you're alive at the end of that, then I'll have a go doing it. But there wasn't much time to do that in those days. So when we got to filming my little bit with Greedo being shot and dying, I, like everyone else on set, wondered how we were going to do it. And we did it by getting a dummy and sitting him in with Greedo's head and costume on, and doing the scene up until the very moment of the next shot where Greedo actually explodes and dies. And so we shot the scene up to that point, and then put the dummy in the chair, put the costume on. The Gelignite guy filled the costume full of explosives and blew up the entire studios nearly the first time. So everything was on fire. And so the people had to come out, and the firemen had to put the fires out, and then they ripped the costume off me, still on fire, because that's how it was in those days. And I quickly shook it and put it on, and did the 2-shot or the 1-shot of dying onto the table, and they even poured a bit of acid onto the back of the costume to make it steam to look as though I'd been shot through the chest. But that's kind of how the whole movie worked in those days. It was done very quickly and carefully, but with a certain amount of a wing and a prayer. But it was so brilliant, many of the scenes, that it seemed to work.
Yeah, great insight. I'm just thinking, with health and safety regulations, and quite rightly so.
Today,
that wouldn't happen today. And by the way, I love the fact that you brought up, George. It was notoriously pressured by the unions. It was like, we have to stop tea breaks. We have to stop at 5 o'clock. We can't go on till 9 o'clock. And he's like, what do you mean stop? What do you mean stop? We're trying to make a movie here. So you're right. I mean, not under budget, but under pressure to finish on time, but under pressure from the cultural kind of working men union regulations. So
absolutely, I think you regretted coming to England after that. After that point, even taking into account the tax deductions.
Yeah, but then you see, the angelic like man would want his little short 5 minutes of fame to I remember those guys. I hear the stories about them wanting to literally, blow everything up and make it look spectacular, and having to like, you need to calm that down. It can't that much. So
let's not do that.
Yes. Let's not injure anybody. So you kind of touched upon most of that, but when you said George said just play it like an 80, like you would in the movie. So that scene where you sat with Harrison and Peter across the table from you, was there any specific direction given to you, as in, well, this is going to happen, we just need you to do this? Or was it a case of, let's just see how this goes and your reaction, etc.?
I don't remember that much apart from that one shot. I remember that very well. And I remember reading in for Harrison behind camera Greedo's lines to Han, so that Han could do all the, over my dead body sort of thing, and play all his sequences. So I remember that quite well, and didn't think anything about it, because I'd just come from the theatre at that point, and found myself in, I think it was only my second film, or maybe it'd been I'd done another few bits and pieces, and so I was used to, if the other actor had a close-up, particularly in TV, and you were behind camera, you read in the lines for him. I didn't realise that the continuity girl, or the it could be anybody actually, would read in the lines for him. So I think they were quite surprised that I was actually reading the lines in English for Harrison to respond to for his close-ups on that scene. So I remember that quite well. But at the time, I remember thinking, oh God, I don't know, this will not appear in the movie, this whole scene, because the mask didn't move at all. It wasn't animatronic in those days. There was nothing to make it shift. And so I thought, and in fact, they couldn't hear any of the dialogue. And Greedo at that point sounded like a young English Etonian who'd just been playing. So I thought, there's no way this is going to be in the movie. It's bound to be cut. I'll be in the other scenes where I'm just the right hand man to Jabba, So I sort of wasn't considering that to be now the icon of the 13th most famous sci-fi scene in all time.
Yeah, and look, the most debated. Where I'm going with this. Now. The most debated part of that movie.
Yes.
Who shot first?
Yeah.
I saw that movie. If you remember, I don't know if you. I've been asked questions for something that happened decades ago. It must be very difficult. I can't remember what I did last year with work, but let alone.
No, me neither.
That it's almost 50 years. Can you believe it? Next year, 76. 50 years. That's an incredible memory you have. But anyway, so I saw that movie in 1978 because it took a little while for it to come out in the UK on public release. You might remember that. But I distinctly remember Han Solo shooting Greedo because he was tackling him as you've been a bad boy. People are after. There's a bounty on your head, and I'm taking you in. And Han Solo took the gun under the table and shot him. But there's a lot of debate about who shot first.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear your opinion, but to me, it's Harrison Ford. Han Solo shot Greedo.
Well,
There's no debate.
Well, yeah, I don't think a day goes by where somebody doesn't ask me in a supermarket who shot first, which is fine. I mean, I am incredibly lucky that, as you've just pointed out, 50 years later, people are still talking about a scene in a sci-fi film. So I find that an absolute a privilege that people should still be interested, really. But yeah, I'm with you. I mean, if anyone asks my opinion, I read the script, and the script says we played the scene. It was 2 or 3 pages long. It was quite a long scene for an insert scene. And at the end, in parenthesis, it says Han shoots the alien. I didn't even have a name in those days. So that's how it was. And that's how I read it. And that's how I thought it really worked. And I'm sure George did too. Well, he did for 10 years. That's for sure. And then, of course, he was persuaded that to make Harrison's character look less like a bad guy, I don't know what happened then the second time. Did we shoot together, or I missed, or something like that? But you know, as I say, Greedo did go to assassin college, but on the day of close range, he was at home with Mrs. Greedo. So grassy knoll, he would have been fine, but short range day, not so much. But it is extraordinary, though, that debate, and has kept Greedo's character alive. I mean, even to the extent that he appears in other films now. He's in Jay and Silent Bob, and
that's right,
talked about in all that sort of stuff. So I mean, extraordinary.
Yeah,
not just Greedo, I have to say. A lot of the other smaller characters, and Jeremy wouldn't have minded me saying this, as Boba Fett. With one line, Boba Fett became one of the most famous characters in sort of sci-fi history, and is now on TV as a thorough character in its own right, and so it's extraordinary how just all this minor stuff is now become major, iconic, really, over 50 years. Yeah, it's like being in The Wizard of Oz.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. I don't think you and I have the answer to this, and nor should we. But it's that, believe it or not, is one of the scenes that is still, well, it's not now, but it was still tinkered with by George for many times in the special editions. And, I don't know what it was about that scene. I don't think he was kind of looking at it to say, I haven't got anything right. It was a case of, let's just make this a little bit more clear what's happening here. And
I never got a chance to ask. I haven't seen him for years and years and years, but I never got a chance to ask him why he did eventually change it. But I heard an interview that he gave, it must have been now 7 or 8 years ago, certainly pre-COVID, saying that the reason why he wanted Greedo to get a shot off was because he wanted the Han Solo character to be more like John Wayne used to be in his sort of movies, where he'd go into the barroom sequence, he'd know the bad guy was in there, but he always gave the bad guy the chance to go for his gun, so it would be a fairer gunfight in the end. And I think that was George's explanation in that interview that I saw him do. That was his latest incarnation of the scene.
Yeah, wonderful. So I love what you just said, and I want to touch upon that with a question. It's 50 years next year, which is an incredible, legacy that George and the Star Wars universe has across the world right now. And so, looking back from where we are now to then, what do you think about the original, creature constructions from that Cantina series, by Stuart Freeborn? I mean, to me, they still hold up. And that's almost 50 years ago. I know we have CGI today. I get all that. But in terms of practical effects, practical sets, I think, to me, I want to hear your opinion. What was created back then, whether it's Harryhausen or Freeborn, whoever it is, I think those things, even the recent, Phil Tippett and so on. These constructions that just stand the test of time, and I think that it's something for me that it's just iconic. And looking back and thinking, how on earth did they create that kind of look and feel back then? When you consider it was 1976,
Yes.
it's not 2026.
I truly, I mean, George's imagination was just extraordinary, because he wrote all that as we sit 60 years ago. He must have written it 8-10 years, or maybe slightly less, than when the movie was finally realized. So it's been in the ether of his imagination for so long, and then creating that whole thing, and then inventing industrial light and magic to cope with the imagination that he had for all that was truly extraordinary. So, as I mentioned early on, serendipity in everything plays a huge part, where kind of all the fates have to come together to knit everything together to make things quite as iconic as they become. And yeah, I mean, Stuart's contribution, I think, was in design and in creative design, and there was no one else around like him at the time. Harryhausen, certainly, for the stop-go motion animated stuff that he did in wonderful films, again, that I used to watch. I'm sure he did, like Land That Time Forgot, and The Land of the Dinosaurs and Journey to the Center of the Earth. Those stop-go battles between those pterodactyls and the dinosaurs were so extraordinary, and are still potent today if you watch them. Yes, of course they appear. They don't appear what some people call dated, but they're certainly of their time, but they have the same effect. It's kind of like watching the humor of Chaplin, I know that's debatable, or Buster Keaton today in a black and white film from 60, 65, 70 years ago is just as funny now to anybody's accumulative funny bone than it was then. And I think the same for Stuart and his genius and the team he had around him. They were all brilliant in their own field. I mean, Peter, as the stunt guy and the stunt arranger on the first three movies, can't remember his second name. His family will never forgive me, but I'm old now, so that's my excuse. Again, was a genius in organising some of the now iconic stunts that you take for granted in those films. So I think it was a combination of serendipity and genius. Not to say that today there aren't those people around. They are, and you see it all the time in film. You know, your breath is taken by something that's filmed, and you think, God, I've never seen that before, or how did they come up with that? But I'm with you about CGI and any computer generated imagery. I wouldn't dismiss it at all. I think it's not going to go away. It is the future, and it does create extraordinary fantasy. They would never have made Lord of the Rings without it. But like you, I like the balance of live action and CGI. Then I think the movie, if it's sci-fi or fantasy, works incredibly well. If it's too heavy on either side, then the punters always know and don't like it that much. And I'm with them. I agree with them.
Yeah, very, very, very true. So I have two more questions before we get into our member-based questions, and I'm going to have questions from members all over the world. So it's going to be wonderful to see those read out. Anyway, so before I ask you a very unique question about some of the more modern day Star Wars movies and your thoughts about those, but so just again going back to that time, wrap-up production, you've played the part of Greedo, the Cantina scene, the kind of duel, if you like, with Han Solo. So then, you kind of go about your career acting. And so when Star Wars was released at what point did you realize that, gosh, this is no longer, Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. This is going to be some really serious, life-changing,
a good
exposure
question
for me. So
yeah. Well, like you, I didn't see it straight away. I was working actually, so I couldn't go to the premiere in London in Leicester Square, and I didn't get to see it for about a year later. But I knew, because the zeitgeist was brilliant as soon as it came out, I knew that it was it was fun and quite big. But because we didn't, in those days, we didn't have internet or when it first came out, or anything that would immediately erupt the senses in the UK. Everybody loved it in their smaller circles, whether it was London, Birmingham, Manchester, or wherever, who saw it, and the queues went around the block. But I kind of didn't, because I suppose I was working. I didn't really take that much notice until I was, again, with my wife, who was then my girlfriend, on a beach in Greece. And we had some American friends there, and they said we'd only just met them the day before, and they said, "What do you do?" You know, we said, "Well, my wife was a dancer and is now an actress, and I act a little bit." And they said, "Oh, yeah, well, you know, what have you been in? Are you in any film or anything?" I said, "No, not really. It's it's just mostly theatre and TV." And he said, "Oh, I did do a film about a couple of years ago called I think it's Star Wars, isn't it now?" And they went, You were in Star Wars?" And I think at that point I kind of realized that if they knew, and it meant something a little bit more than normally just doing a film, which would then go away in the creative consciousness over the period of a couple of years. And then about a year after that, I found myself in Leicester Square, going to see it with the full Dolby. And like everybody, as soon as the Star Destroyer goes over your head in the cinema, I thought, how did they do that? That is extraordinary. And like everyone, I was captivated by the whole film and thought it was just fantastic, and still not knowing that I was in it. And I think my bit was quite a long way into the film, where they go to Tatooine and do the whole Cantina sequence. But eventually I heard the music, and I did recognize the music, because I had heard that before. And so I thought, I remember this bit. And then I remembered bits of the Cantina, and there was my scene unfolding. And I was so excited in the cinema, I jumped up and said, "That's me."
Wonderful.
Which was a kind of explains how exciting all that was, and in a way it's never gone away, that incredible effect that the movie had for just sort of 2 or 3 weeks in Elstree in 1976. And yes, so I suppose it, but then the burn on my career and all the rest of it was nothing until the guys grew up, who were the directors, who were the kids then, who then became the directors. So about 10 years later, everyone was going, "Paul, you were in Star Wars. This is fantastic." "Yeah, but can I talk about Macbeth?" Or, "No, you were in Star Wars." But for 10 years, no one was kind of interested, So it did take the whole fan basis and all that did take a long time to burn. But it's thankfully, I mean, it's been wonderful. It's never gone away, and very grateful we are to them.
Yeah, one part of just very special memories in your life, but it became significant, and who knew that it would. So one last question before we get into the member questions, Paul. This is wonderful insights. So fast forwarding now to recent movies. Okay, now I want you to think about this with literally and practically a Greedo head on. No doubt you've seen, the newer Star Wars movies, episodes 7, 8, and 9. So in Force Awakens, Han Solo, the smuggler and scoundrel, is killed by his son. What would Greedo think of that?
Again, I saw that in the cinema, and at that point, because it's they're on a bridge, aren't they, with Kylo Ren?
Mm-hmm. That's
and
right.
Kylo Ren, they play that very sort of rather sad scene with Harrison and Kylo on the bridge, and everyone in the cinema, I could feel, were sort of getting into that scene, and it was very sad. And then the moment where Kylo Ren sort of pulls the knife out and knifes him, and Harrison just falls from the bridge, the whole auditorium in the cinema was pin dropped. Apart from me, who went, yes! 40 years it's taken, 40 years to get my revenge. Finally, there is a God. Thank you.
Yeah, well, he had his comeuppance in the end, but I'm sure Greedo was, somewhere
Greedo would be in that green heaven up there somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, you mentioned earlier on the stunt coordinator was Peter Diamond. That's
Peter Diamond. Yes, thank you.
Yeah. That's Fraser and Warwick's father, and Fraser and Warwick are very close members of our Star Wars family, and we've met.
Oh wow, fantastic!
In London in Celebration 2023, when they were guests at our Bunta Eve event in Canary Wharf. So that was wonderful to meet.
Fantastic!
And they had great memories of Tony Daniels and being on set with Dad. So just like you, they went to see the movie and went, "That's us, that's us, we're there."
That's us. They were in that film. Yes, I mean, I think, I mean, Warwick particularly was amazing about. He's had a wonderful life, though.
Mm. Yeah, that's great. Okay, Paul, wonderful stuff. Thank you for answering my questions. Wonderful insights. So we'll go over to the member questions, because I know there are a lot of our members out there that want to get to know you a bit better and ask you some questions. So we'll go into the member question segment. So we'll bring up the first question and I'll read it out to you. Oh, a neighbor of mine. I don't know Mark, but this is Mark in Orlando. Okay, I'll be that guy who shot first. I think we've already answered this.
Exactly. But that proves my point. Everyone, the first question we get is who shot first. And
I'm sure you have that T-shirt.
Well, he did, of course, because if I'd shot first, I'd have run off with Princess Leia. I would have defeated Vader. The whole universe would have been mine. In fact, Harrison owes the rest of his entire filmic career to me, because if I'd shot him, it would have been Greediana Jones. And so it has to be Harris. It has to be Han Solo, I think.
Of course. Yeah, that's brilliant. Except on a list of on another list of disappointments from Jabba the Hutt. Another one that failed.
Yes.
Goodness. Okay, next question. Let's
brilliant.
See who this is from. Second question. Okay, this is from David in North Carolina. Hey, David, hope you're well. Many of us collect a lot of things: autographs, props, toys, comics. Are you a collector of anything?
I do have a few of the bits and pieces mostly from Star Wars, because when the sort of merchandise was first started, and there were little figures of all the creatures and characters in the Star Wars universe. They used to send us one, Funko and Hasbro and other people, and I remember getting a Greedo head, it must have been 6 foot tall, came from the States, delivered by my huffing and puffing postman. And we had no idea what to do with it. I did suggest putting it on the roof and having Greedo's head coming out of the roof, but my wife again wouldn't let me do that. But I did, in 76, there was nothing on a movie that you ever wanted. But I did keep my gun, because all the guns that had been used were a job lot that the props department had bought out really cheaply, like everything else. And they were German Mausers that were decommissioned, so they didn't work. But then again, the props people just put little bits of plastic on the front of the gun's nozzle and on the handles to make them look a bit more like the blasters you see in the original film. So I took mine home because it was pretty cool. And I gave it to my kids to play with, and about 2 or 3 years later, one of them snapped off the plastic handle, so I threw it in the trash. And a collector said recently, "You threw it in the trash?" He said, "Even broken, I'd have paid you a few $100,000 for that."
Wow.
So I threw my kids' education in the trash. Thanks to Greedo.
Who would have known, though?
But
go ahead.
That's about it, really. I mean, I suppose actors from time to time we collect a few bits and pieces, but I haven't got. I've got a lot of programs of things that I was in the past, which my kids will no doubt burn as soon as I go to that great Cantina in the sky.
No. I hope they don't. Please,
Yeah.
keep your dad's stuff.
Yeah. Keep
Anyway,
the stuff.
I keep saying to my 32-year-old, hey, I've got some stuff. Don't
No,
keep
no,
this,
Dad.
keep
No.
this, keep this.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, back to your point. And I've said this to a lot of our member base. We'll talk off camera how I know this, but I know a lot of the weapons were repurposed from the James Bond movie, The Spy Who Loved Me.
Oh,
The
right.
blasters were a reconstructed or kind of modified version of a Sten gun. So
Right.
anyway, so yeah, so you're
Yeah,
absolutely right.
you can see it in the. I mean, the only other more famous blaster is Han Solo's, of course. And I think I don't know who's got that. I don't know whether Harrison's got that or whether Lucasfilm got it.
I think it's very similar. It's Mauser based anyway. So.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question. Who have we got? The next question. Okay, Ray from Canada. Hello.
Hello, Ray.
Hope you're doing good, well in Canada. Hi, Paul. What do you think of the 1997 special edition changes and how Greedo met his demise? I personally like that Greedo got a shot off.
Well, there you go. You see, I mean, everyone has an opinion, and quite rightly so. It's the movies, after all. I mean, I suppose if it was me, I just can't imagine what it. I mean, I have directed a lot of things in my time, but I can't imagine having to go over and over stuff to that degree that George had to, really, and again all the pressures that he had. So I'm not sure how I feel about changes. I think it's like a painting. When no artist will tell you that they really know when to stop or when a painting has finally been realized. It's always very difficult to come to a conclusion, and I think that's the same with any sort of piece of art or work that you produce. So it's easy to tinker with things. My own sort of opinion is it stood up kind of on its own, although I do take the point that Greedo was supposed to be an assassin, and his job was to bring in that rascal Solo or shoot him. So yeah, I can see why you thought he should have got a shot off.
Yeah, again, it's all about opinions. You're quite right. For me, I get it. Artists create something wonderful, and for me, it's like looking at the Mona Lisa. Why would you want to try and make it or improve it or whatever? It's a classic. It's a masterpiece. So everybody has different opinions. Me, I would have just left everything as it was. But I do get the point.
I get it that people want to change things, and of course there are different generations too, and that does have an effect. Now I'm the advanced age that I am. I don't give a flying about very little. so
I'm getting there.
It's entirely up to you, really. I'm just glad that people still enjoy the movie.
Yeah, of course, and that's why you do what you do. Okay, so I think we're on our last question from our members. What's the last question? I think it's the last one. Okay, it's David from North Carolina again. Follow up the previous question. If you're not in fact a collector, what is your most prized, most valuable, or most unique collectible? It can be anything. It doesn't have to be Star Wars based.
Yes, it doesn't have to be Star Wars related. I mean, we do have a few. It's interesting that we've thrown away a lot of stuff over the years, and I think that's been a problem, because you do look back and you think, oh God, why did I throw that away? I kind of like that. A vase or an article, and we do have a few little bits of. We have a couple of paintings that are quite wonderful, and I have which I bought for Katie, actually, my wife, a sculptured dancer in bronze, which I'm pretty fond of, but I don't collect things I think I could easily become an obsessive about collecting things, teapots or silverware, Georgian spoons, glasses. I kind of like a lot of. I tell you, the only thing I do collect, and this is because one of my kids lives in Taipei and I worked in China and lived in China for a time, is that I do collect ginger jars, and preferably middle-aged ones, or ones from the Qing or Ming, not the real. I mean, I can't afford the really expensive ones, but I do collect little ginger jars and big ones, and so I suppose that's my That's my secret passion. But I haven't got many of those. I've got about half a dozen or so of those.
Oh, what a great collection. Okay, so well, oh gosh, we had at the last question. So somebody's just put one in at the last minute. So not sure if you saw the Lego movie rebuild.
Yeah.
Galaxy Leia ran off with
Yeah, absolutely sensible girl in the galaxy of Lego she is. I did love the Lego movie, I must say. Great fan of Lego Star Wars, yes.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, Paul. So one thing that would be wonderful for everybody to know, sadly, I missed you. I wasn't able to make the event. I had to cancel. You were in ICC Nashville last year, and a few other events. Where else can our members from all over the world meet you? Do you have any appearances you can
What
tell
am I
us
doing?
about in 25, 26?
Anybody in France, I'm going to with Julian Glover, who was also in Star Wars, but was also a big star and was in Game of Thrones and all those bits and pieces, and is a great actor. Yeah. So I'm going with Julian to Mégane or Mégane, I think it's called, just outside Paris. That's next weekend. That's I think that's Saturday or Sunday. And then I'm coming to see you, Jonathan, in Boston. And when's that? It's the end of March, isn't it? The last week in March, is it?
Yeah.
Somewhere around about then. So I'm very much looking forward to that. And I'm also, the problem is I'm trying to get out to Japan. But it's only if I can sort of work out flights and work it in with going to see my daughter in Taipei and Taiwan. So that may or may not happen. But I'm doing quite a few in the UK and maybe coming to New York in August or September. So there are one or two things, particularly in the States, lined up. But other than that, Boston is my next event.
Oh, wonderful. So anyway, so if you're out and about, if you're in the Paris region or Boston, come and see Paul. Come and meet him. Come and shake Greedo's hand. He's alive and here and living and got great memories. So meet Paul. Fascinating. Conversation with you today. Thank you, Paul. Thank you for your generous amount of time today. I know it's kind of late where you are in the UK, so can't thank you enough for the wonderful insights, a trip down memory lane and stories from back in 76 and to where we are right now.
Brilliant. Well, thank you. Thank you for being so kind and charming a host.
Oh, you're most welcome. Okay, with that being said, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for being part of our audience today. And as always, I will just finish with this. To all you Star Wars fans out there, may the Force be with you.